Sources say the time may be running out for former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin to accept a plea deal.
If he doesn't accept the deal, our sources expect federal prosecutors to ask a grand jury to indict Nagin, possibly as early as tomorrow.
We know Ray Nagin has been offered but hasn't accepted any plea deal. When we caught up with Nagin's attorney earlier this week, he wouldn't say much.
Has he been meeting with prosecutors?
I can't discuss any of the case itself. But what I can tell you is that I don't have any information about anything that's going on.
But sources tell Fox 8 News plenty is going on behind the scenes. If a deal isn't reached, sources expect federal prosecutors will ask a grand jury to indict Nagin. That could come as early as tomorrow. What we don't know, what happens to Nagin's children. Sources have told Fox 8 News if Nagin accepts a plea deal, prosecutors may be inclined to overlook a payment former city vendor Rodney Williams says he made to close family members of Nagin believed to be his two sons. Williams also admitted to making payments to the Granite Company owned by Nagin and his sons. If a deal is not reached, we don't know if prosecutors will seek to indict just the former mayor or his children too. Nagin's attorney hasn't said much, but insists his client is innocent.
His position has always been consistent that he did nothing improper. I can tell you that.
Sources tell us negotiations have taken place between Robert Jenkins and prosecutors, and those sources expected the two sides to reach some type of plea deal this week before any possible indictment. But Nagin hasn't accepted a deal, and prosecutors may now be ready to let a grand jury look at the facts of the case.
But it sure looks like their case is ready to go. They have a stable full of witnesses in the starting gate, ready to bolt for the finish line. And I think that is very much stimulating the conversations.
We do know the Nagin grand jury has previously met on a Friday. The attorney for Nagin's children confirmed that when he told Fox 8 News his clients appeared before the grand jury on a Friday morning in October. If a grand jury takes up this investigation, Nagin will likely not appear and may not even know the grand jury is being presented the case. A case that could take a significant turn as early as tomorrow.
Good morning, I'm Liz Reyes.
And I'm John Snell. Just moments ago, a federal grand jury indicted former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin. This follows a years-long corruption investigation into the former mayor and the awarding of city contracts. There have been two guilty pleas that have gotten a lot of attention. This happened just literally within the last minute at federal court. And by the way, the charges we're understanding are conspiracy and depriving the public of the honest services of government. Bribery is at least one of the counts in this case. Filing false income tax returns, another. Read just in federal court a moment ago. Lee Zurich has been in court this morning and has a little more on the indictment now. Lee?
Yeah, John, I'll kind of let you know how the day played out today. The grand jury convened at 9 o'clock and met for a while, heard testimony on this case. Obviously, the grand jury proceedings are private, so we don't know what went on in there. But we do know that 22 grand jurors decided to indict former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin just minutes ago, 2 or 3 minutes ago, in front of the magistrate judge on duty today, Judge Ivan Lamel. Prosecutors read the indictment, and Lamel accepted the indictment. So former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin indicted in federal court today on 21 counts: conspiracy, honest services fraud, bribery, money laundering, and filing a false tax return. We don't have a copy of the indictment yet. That'll have to go to the clerk's office. We'll get a copy of that and obviously know more of the details about the indictment. But certainly, I think it's responsible and fair to speculate that a lot of this indictment has to do with dealings with two former city vendors, being Rodney Williams and Frank Ferdella. Both of them have already pleaded guilty inside of federal court, and both will likely testify if this case were to go to trial. We've been talking for all this week that we knew this seemed to be coming to a close from all the sources that we have. There was a deal on the table for Nagin. Many people thought Nagin would have taken the deal this week, but he did not, and they decided to indict the former mayor, and he is indicted inside the federal courthouse today.
We're looking, Lee, at some file tape there of one of the ironies of this case. This was fairly early on in the investigation, when it was just coming to light that the mayor was perhaps being looked at. They weren't even focusing on him publicly as a target at that point. He was sitting next to Jim Letton, the now former U.S. attorney. Let me ask you, a lot of this has, we believe, centered around Stone Age LLC, the granite company that the former mayor had founded along with his two sons. There had been some speculation that they might be named in this indictment. Do you know at this point if he has co-defendants, Lee?
No, we have not. We were up there, and from as far as we can tell, unless something else happens later today or something we missed, but Nagin's kids were not indicted today. It was just one indictment on Nagin. That's what was read in the courtroom today. Now, we'll have to read the indictment, John, because, you know, you've been around here long enough to know sometimes they'll put, you know, unnamed co-conspirators in an indictment and then later go supersede it and indict certain people. So this could be a strategic tactic. And Joe Rispani, our legal analyst, who we'll get to, I know, soon later today, can talk more about this. But, you know, we've seen in the past where they'll indict someone and then still try to get them to take a plea deal. And if they don't, then they'll do a superseding indictment and end up indicting other people. So I don't think this is to say that Nagin's kids are out, you know, not going to be indicted. I think this is just a step, and prosecutors will see where this goes from here. You know, because Greg Meffert was charged in a 63-count indictment that ended up pleading, you know, guilty after he was indicted. So, you know, a lot could still happen with this case.
Is it your sense, Lee, that a lot of this will in fact focus on these, you know, Liz mentioned Rodney Williams, the apparently former CEO of Threefold Consultants, and Frank Fradella, who made millions of dollars in city contracts. I guess one of the questions we'll have today is how wide-ranging it is and whether it goes farther off the reservation than those two cases.
Yeah, and you know, we've seen in the past, you know, even like the Aaron Broussard case, where they'll have an indictment and they'll come back and indict him for other things too, if he decides not to play ball, if you will, and plead out. So, you know, we can see some things today in indictment, but that's who's to say that there won't be more down the road that they bring up later. I think certainly the center of this investigation, from everyone we've talked to, and just knowing how the office in the U.S. Attorney's Office works, is that Frank Fradella and Rodney Williams are at the center of this investigation. The federal government likes to have witnesses, likes to have corroborating witnesses that are admitting to guilt and admitting that the other person was part of that scheme. And you have two right there front and center with Rodney Williams and Frank Fradella. You know, there's been some speculation. What will Greg Meffert bring to the table? What will Mark St. Pierre bring to the table? Or even an Aaron Bennett? You know, all of them have either pleaded guilty or been found guilty in federal court. And, you know, that's the kind of part of the indictment. We'll have to wait and see if any of that's in the indictment. You know, Mark St. Pierre is a perfect example, the former vendor who went to trial and got about 17 years of jail time. Will he be part of this indictment? Are some of the things that he could bring to the table, have the statute of limitations passed? Could he be more of a character witness in showing that this, you know, conspiracy lasted a while, but, you know, not necessarily part of any of the counts or charges against Nagin? We're just going to have to wait and see as we read the indictment and see how this thing plays out.
And let me point out also, for anybody who's channel surfing and tuning in, who might be a regular viewer to the noon newscast here on Fox 8, that this is live continuing coverage of the breaking news just moments ago that a federal grand jury has indicted former New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin on a broad conspiracy indictment, including 21 counts. A juror who might have doubts, maybe a reasonable doubt, starts to say, well, wait a minute, there's this guy that says that, and then this guy, and then now there's a third guy, and it sort of becomes everybody against one.
Well, and I think this is, you've seen this a lot, and this is the perfect example of the type of case that they like to get. They like to get a couple of their witnesses lined up that say, yes, I paid him the money for this, and then you line up a lot of other character witnesses, as you will, and certainly Meffert, St. Pierre, Aaron Bennett, all these guys, you know, Fradella's attorney, Randy Smith, said they're on Team USA. His guy, Frank Fradella, is on Team USA. So guys in the government's corner. St. Pierre obviously would like to get his sentence reduced some by cooperating. So certainly those guys could, you know, help the government being a character witness, if you will.
And I think these people will, you know, they'll be honest and they'll say, look, I've lied. I may have taken bribes. I may have given the mayor bribes. I did this or that. But this is their chance to tell the truth, because essentially they're helping themselves by telling the truth.
In the meantime, we'll get back to you, but let's go right for the moment to Fox 8 legal analyst Joe Responti, who I guess, Joe, if there was any doubt, we now know who public official A was in all of these documents.
Yes,
as the
sir.
federals trying to build this case.
They touched all the regular bases. I think they got him on a money laundering, on a tax evasion, and a conspiracy. So this is your straight up indictment, which we all knew was going to come down, and then here we are. I would have to think they've laid it all out to him, as we all knew what was going on, so he certainly did, and he has decided to go forward. So, I mean, I'm a trial guy. He better get ready to go to trial, and let's see how the chips fall. Now, having said that, of course there could come a time where he's going to enter a plea, but we're not at that day yet.
We bring in Joe Meg Gatto over here, and she has a little more information about what the U.S. Attorney's Office may do. We've seen so much over the years, Jim Letton holding press conferences after an indictment. Letton obviously not the U.S. Attorney anymore.
That's right, Lee, and I actually just spoke to the lead prosecutor in this case, Matt Coleman, who tells me that the U.S. Attorney's Office will not be doing any sort of press conference today, so a departure from the normal routine, but they will be issuing a written statement about this indictment a little later today, so we hope to get that a little later, as well as a copy of the indictment.
Yeah, that's obviously the key. We know it's been assigned, as we said, to from what we hear, to Judge Ginger Berrigan, and awaiting the copy of the indictment that will give us more details about the charges against the mayor, former mayor.
Mayor Mitch Landrieu responded to the news of Ray Nagin's indictment in a statement. He says, quote, "This is a sad day for the city of New Orleans. Today's indictment of former Mayor Ray Nagin alleges serious violations of the public's trust. Public corruption cannot and will not be tolerated." UNO political scientist Ed Chervenak joins us now for a little perspective. So what does this do for our image? And it may not all be bad, right?
It's never good news when your former mayor is indicted by the federal government for corruption, bribery, violating the honest services clause. But at the same time, it shows that regardless of your position or power, you are held accountable to the law, that corruption is just not going to be tolerated anymore in New Orleans.
Well, NOLA.com and Times-Picayune political columnist Jarvis DeBerry joins us now. And Jarvis, this couldn't come at a worse time with all that's about to happen in the city.
Exactly. He came into office in 2002 promising that he was going to run a scandal-free administration, that his was going to be different than the previous administrations. And despite all the finger pointing he did at the Mark Morial administration and previous inhabitants of City Hall, he's now the first mayor of the city to ever be indicted. And that's a real shame. And it's a really sad day for the city.
Good afternoon, I'm Nancy Parker.
And I'm Kim Holden. Prosecutors accuse Nagin of accepting payoffs, free trips, and other arrangements. Today's indictment charges him with conspiracy, honest services wire fraud, bribery, filing false income tax returns, and money laundering.
Over the next 2 hours, we'll bring you team coverage of the case against Nagin, what's next, and what current city leaders and residents have to say about the indictment.
We begin, though, with Lee Zurich, who's been investigating Ray Nagin's possible corruption for years.
And, there are many things in this indictment we kind of figured would come if it did lead to an indictment, but there was actually one or two surprising revelations in the indictment as well, too. Our sources told us all week to expect some significant development to this investigation, either a plea deal or an indictment. Sources thought Nagin might accept a plea deal early in the week, but when he wouldn't, prosecutors moved forward and asked a grand jury to indict the former mayor.
Federal prosecutors Matt Coleman and Rick Pickens left the courthouse around noon today, right after securing an indictment of former Mayor Ray Nagin. The grand jury met for about 2.5 hours, hearing testimony. The 22 grand jurors unanimously decided to indict the former mayor. Nagin faces a 21-count indictment. Taking a closer look, that includes 1 count of conspiracy, 6 counts of bribery, 9 counts of honest services wire fraud, 1 count of money laundering conspiracy, and 4 counts of income tax evasion. Federal prosecutors say Nagin used his public office to provide favorable treatment that benefited businesses, that in turn gave him bribery and kickback payments by cash, granite, wire transfers, and free travel. The federal government alleges all of this took place from 2005 to 2008. The government says much of the kickbacks were funneled through the granite company Stone Age that Nagin formed with his 2 sons in 2005. At the heart of the government's case, payments made to Nagin by former city vendors Rodney Williams and Frank Fradella. Both have already pleaded guilty in federal court, and both have said they will cooperate, meaning they'll testify if this case goes to trial. The indictment mentions more than $60,000 in payments Rodney Williams made to Nagin. In return, Williams' company, Threefold Consultants, was awarded a series of lucrative city contracts. Frank Fradella's company, Home Solutions, had contracts at the French Market, Airport, and French Quarter. The government says Nagin bribed Fradella, who gave the now former mayor $50,000. And when Nagin left office, Fradella hired him as a consultant, paying him another $112,000. The indictment also lists trips given to Nagin by former city vendors Mark St. Pierre and Aaron Bennett. St. Pierre is in federal prison. Bennett is awaiting to be sentenced in a separate case. And federal prosecutors allege in 2006, Nagin received private jet travel and limousine services to New York City from an unnamed businessman. In return, Nagin waived tax penalties owed by that businessman on a delinquent tax bill. The indictment says that businessman owned and operated a theater in New Orleans East. Nagin was also indicted for falsely filing income tax returns for 4 years. The government says he failed to report a total of about $500,000 of income from 2005 to 2008.
And you know, you've been covering this story from the get-go. Was it Nagin's calendar controversy that kind of first made you go, well, okay, something's not right
certainly
here?
Because, you know, years ago I had, requested Nagin's calendar, and they didn't want to give it to us, and then they tried to give us a redacted version of the calendar, crossing out a lot of meetings and different things. And actually, if you read the indictment today, one of the things they do say is that Nagin, through a public records request, tried to hide meetings he had with some of these people. As we laid out in a series of stories, Frank Fradella, one of the people charged, one of the people included in this indictment, is one of the people that Nagin did not want the media, us, to find out he was in fact meeting with.
And as Joe Raspani said earlier, our legal analyst, the paper trails kind of lead up, whether they're financial paper trails or, like you said, the calendar trail or whatever.
And also just the government, they love having witnesses. They love people taking the stand saying, yes, I gave him this money, in return he gave me this. So they have the paper and the documents, but they have the human being who will go in front of a jury and back that up, and Frank Fradella and Rodney Williams and possibly some of these others. So could be some significant testimony if this does in fact go to trial.
Because their success rate is just astronomical.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the current statistics, but at one time it was 90-something%. People say you can indict someone fairly easily, and while that may be true, this U.S. Attorney's Office usually doesn't indict unless they are fairly certain they can get a conviction. With that said, though, former Mayor Nagin is innocent until proven guilty, so we'll have to wait if this goes forward, if it goes to trial, what a jury ultimately decides.
Sure. All right, thanks, Lee. Well, U.S. Attorney Dana Bente reacted to the grand jury's decision to indict Nagin. He said, quote, "This office will continue its history of investigating and prosecuting public corruption. This is an important part of the office's mission to serve the citizens of the Eastern District of Louisiana and make certain they have honest public officials."
Ray Nagin's attorney says he was surprised the former mayor was indicted today because he and Nagin had been in active negotiations with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Meg Gatto joins us now with more from Robert Jenkins today.
Well, Jenkins says he firmly believed there would not be an indictment today because there was a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday between himself and the government to discuss the case. Jenkins says he's not sure what prompted the government to move forward with the indictment today, but at this point, Ray Nagin considers himself to be innocent. Jenkins says Nagin was also surprised by today's indictment, but he's confident that he will be acquitted. Nagin also feels that he's done nothing improper, according to Jenkins. Nagin's 2 sons, who had both appeared before the grand jury last year, were not indicted. Jenkins thinks the government may try to get Nagin to come in and consider a plea deal by saying, "We didn't indict your sons, so work with us a little." But although Jenkins has been in talks with the government, he cannot say if there may be a plea deal, but assures us he will continue to speak with prosecutors about the case.
Well, I can't say that there will be a plea deal or there won't. I mean, everything's on the table. We will always do what's in the best interest of the client, but at this particular time, we all are gearing up for trial.
We've reached out to Ray Nagin today for comment. So far, we haven't received a response, but this morning he retweeted Joel Osteen saying, "You are closest to your victory when you face the greatest opposition."